Welcome to Q&A 4 with me, Meta-Nomad, or James Ellis, as you all know my real name now. So these are the questions that have been given on Patreon and in the Q&A channel in the Discord. So yeah, let's just get into it. So the first question is, what do you see as the benefit of joining a spiritual ism, like Catholicism, with your seeming endorsement of an anarch mind state, versus exploring spirituality personally with no confines, which of course could still include interacting with Christ consciousness or participating in chosen rituals of those practices as they serve you? Sort of a few questions going on in there. The benefit of joining a spiritual ism, I don't particularly think differs between the anarch mind state and the individual one which this person's on about, but I'll get to the confusion there with the anarch and the individual. As for joining a spiritualism like Catholicism, I think just the benefit there is whatever spirituality you wish to practice, be it Catholicism, Christianity, or something more esoteric, a group or an ism is going to give you a firmer foundation, and more often than not, most of the people I know who've practice things solely, such as even Christianity or occultist stuff, they tend to not really follow it as strictly as they could, because there is something to be said for accountability and someone sort of waiting for you to get to a meeting, or someone, some form of sunk cost which you don't want to give up. Whereas if you're on your own, it's entirely down to you and it's much easier to give up. So I think really the benefit of joining any ism is that it's sort of an anchor within modernity, which is just constantly trying to pull you in multiple directions. As for this joining an ism against the anarch mind state, it isn't against the anarch mind state as I read the anarch. So the anarch position on this would be, I think, you in a certain sense, you can actually be an anarch who has some affiliations with certain groups or isms. The difference being is that you always retain this sort of third-party understanding of what it is you're within, and your sort of being isn't entirely subsumed into that ism. That doesn't become entirely who you are. So I think there is something to be said for, but the anarch would always come first. So there's something to be said for, Junger, who came up with the concept of the anarch, it's said 2 years before his death, converted to Catholicism. And I think that could be done still from the anarch point of view, but the anarch point of view would come first in that you think your thoughts and you're not actually getting involved in this in the sense that you believe that it's become your entire life. So I think that, there's a compatibility there, and I think the benefits are fairly clear, especially within modernity. So the next question is what the role of religion/spirituality is in collapse/acceleration. So religion and spirituality. Okay, so religion and spirituality in a collapse scenario, generally speaking, religion just springs back up. I would highly recommend Canticle for Leibowitz. I would also recommend Stars Reach by John Michael Greer, for two great science fiction novels which deal with this topic of how religion comes back in a collapse scenario, and why it comes back and in what form it comes back. And generally, in collapse scenarios, people are seeing their sort of cornerstones of their ethical and moral livelihoods, the notions of normality which they held dear and believed to be sort of these eternal truths. They're seeing these constantly deconstructed and destructed around them. So religion generally fills that gap very quickly. And it's not generally a specific religion. It can be anything, but it's, for most people, some sort of anchor to navigate the world from that point. So when we look at what's going on with the long descent, currently with regards to collapse, the cornerstones that I sort of see which would collapse and which will eventually have to be replaced, and I think this is going to happen sooner than we think. One of the cornerstones is the idea that our freedom and our independence and our meaning comes from consumption. And actually a lot of this is, a lot of young people are getting very wise to the fact that they aren't being fulfilled by consuming things. And the one of the great quotes I came across recently by John Michael Greer is this idea that, just to paraphrase, is the idea that basically all the value we have in our lives is placed onto things. Now, I have no problem with like discussing property rights, and I think property rights are great. But all the things that we have of value, such as a house, a car, everything we would say we own which has value, is on these sort of very cheaply made consumable items. And that is where we hold sort of whether or not we have these sort of this investment capital held within our lives. And if you begin to think, well, where else do I have value in my life? Do I have, let's say, stocks and shares, even though that's abstract? Do I have a property with some sort of resource on it, such as crops or water? Do I have some sort of skill which is valuable, such as, let's say, cooking, or an electrician or a carpenter? Most people don't have these, and the forms of collapse that we could, just to bring this back around, the forms of collapse that we'll begin to see is the deconstruction of this cornerstone, which is that consumption is this cornerstone of our very lives. Once that collapses, what you tend to see is people will sort of scatter towards the nearest thing. So it's like an inverse Nietzschean relation in that, God is dead, but only that is dead can be reborn. But of course, when something's reborn, it sort of turns into this undead thing. So what you end up with is often sort of this bastardization of the religion, especially in a collapse scenario, or you find it is this sort of mutation of it, or it's a grasping at some sort of traditionalism which we don't have the kernel of anymore. So it becomes this very strange thing. Now, as for religion, spirituality, and acceleration, my sort of hypothesis on this would be that, coming from the zero acceleration angle, is that collapse and acceleration are the same process inversed, and zero accelerationism is the point that these two are always working together. So as you, let's say, in quotation marks, progress or accelerate, you are collapsing. Things are collapsing at the same time. And so what happens there with religion is that even, if you find the inverse of a cornerstone of someone's morality or normality collapsing, the inverse of that would be some sort of new innovation which completely, derails what we thought of the world. So let's say if there's some new highly developed AI, what happens then is exactly the same thing. Many people will sort of scatter back to religion as a sort of familiarity which gives them comfort, and many people will alter that worship towards the new thing, as people will do in a collapse scenario. So what the innovative original thing, which is born from either an event of collapse or an event of acceleration, that is something which has two sides of potential worship. Either people are scared and they go back to the familiarity, or they utilize that thing as a new form of worship, as we see in the form of people who are beginning to worship AI. Rocco's basilisk is this sort of quasi-religious thing now, or theological thing, in the sense that whether or not you need to begin to worship something before it comes about. And I think just in terms of fiction, I think one of the great examples would be the Fallout series, where people begin to worship the atomic bomb after a nuclear holocaust, because that's sort of the center point of what has caused their new reality. So things along those lines, I think that's how they interconnect. So the next question is, how are traditionalism and exit connected? Or what religious occult practices are worth cultivating in order to prepare for and carry out an exit? Okay, so traditionalism and exit, I really think they're only really connected in an aesthetic way. Many of the people who sort of hearken for an exit, it's like an exit backwards. They want to exit modernity and retreat or reverse back to something else. So I think in that sense they are adhering to a form of tradition which has long since gone. And I think it's quite silly to do that, and actually quite dangerous. Because, once again, you're never dealing with the pure thing. But I don't think it's solely bad either. I think, there's clearly the point of tradition is that it's time-tested morals which have been proven to work, and time-tested, organizations of society which have been proven to work. So I don't really see anything wrong with tradition in the sense of a toolbox to learn from. But the problem is that when people exit, are they going to drag contemporary values into these traditions and bastardize them in the sense that tool then becomes useless? That would be my worry. What religious occult practices are worth cultivating in order to prepare and for and carry out an exit? Well, exit is a process. I've said this a long time. Like you don't suddenly get somewhere and you've exited. That's a really dangerous position to be in. And this is like the Kaczynskian exit. There's in Ted Kaczynski, in that you get your little patch of land and you cordon yourself off. And for 2 years he was fine, and then the dirt bikes started coming by, the planes were flying over, and then the logging company came in, and all of a sudden his Eden is like infected. And this is the problem. You can't do that. That's why exit is a process. Is that you can't just exit in quotation marks society and then pretend that it doesn't exist. It's a problem with a lot of nature writing, is that they go off to these beautiful places and write about them in this sublime language, but they do so in the way that they sort of are acting as if society is dead and gone, and that's a very dangerous thing to do. As for occult and religious practices, I'm not the one. I'm not the person to say like whatever you want to practice, go practice it. I'm all for personal freedoms. I don't think there's any specific to exit which I would sort of recommend. I think maybe some Gurdjieff practices, such as the stop exercise, or the general idea of Gurdjieffian thought that you're sleeping. I mean, exit is potentially this exit from being asleep, as Gurdjieff would call it. So probably Gurdjieff would be a good person to look into for that. So the next question: to what extent, if any, has the philosopher John Gray influenced your outlook, particularly his writings on the myth of progress? This is something I've thought about in recent years. John Gray is someone I'd love to get on, but he's obviously best-selling, very popular. So I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. As for influence, actually, I was in high school when I was first recommended Straw Dogs by John Gray, and that probably stayed in the back of my mind while I was sort of trying to spout these liberal values up until I was about 17, 18, and everything clicked that it just wasn't working. But John Gray's critique of progress was there. So I've read Straw Dogs, Black Mass, and one which I've forgot the name of. And John Gray tends to repeat himself. He's one of these critics of progress whose the same arguments are there time and time again. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think he's actually a brilliant person to recommend to anyone who's potentially on the borderline of beginning to question these things. He doesn't go the whole hog, not even close, but he definitely influenced and stayed in the back of my mind, because I first read Straw Dogs when I would have been 15 when I read that. So that critique of progress and those ideas definitely stayed. As for I think there is better critics of progress. Christopher Lasch is one. Greer is the greatest critic of progress, working at least. Have I ever considered interviewing Eugene McCara? He wrote The Enchantments of Mammon. I know I've never heard of him, and I haven't heard of the book, but I will of course consider interviewing him. I'll consider interviewing anyone. If you just place their name in the feedback and recommendations channel, then I will get in contact with them and see if it fits. Next question is: would I like to live in the Victorian era? We actually discussed this in the Discord, and it was quite a funny chat. There's so many variables here. As much as I would love to, the context is, what kind of person am I? Am I, a serf? Am I a peasant? Am I a nobleman? Even if I was a nobleman, the idealization of the Victorian era as this amazing, innovative place, it's in part true with regards to certain areas, let's say, of communication, with regards to engineering, with regards to a lot of writing and art. It's great. But I also don't want, dysentery, cholera. I don't want to throw my shit out the window into the street. There's a lot of other things like that. Though arguably they did have some of the greatest diets we've ever seen in history. They ate a lot of very oily fish and fresh fruit and veg, apparently. So would I like to live there? I'd like to sort of have a day where I could walk through the average day in a Victorian Era and see what's going on. But yeah, I'd like to see it. I wouldn't like to live it. Have I thought of interviewing Matt Kreisman? I'll look into him once again. So next question, you're knowledgeable about the art world. What do you think of the artist Pickman? This is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft's novels. So, yeah, he's great. What has your relationship been to Neoreaction, NRX, through the years? You mentioned a few months ago about the compatibility between ZAC and NRX and the possibility of some kind of merger of theories, zero reaction. Have you given it any more thought? So my relationship to Neoreaction was sort of when I first came across Neoreaction, I was completely drawn in, because it was the I can't say the beacon of light, but the beacon of darkness to just make sense of a lot of what has been basically not been able to ignore for a long time, and it has slowly dampened, but that's not out of lack of sort of agreement. Though, of course, saying you agree with Neoreaction is a silly thing to say. There's a lot of arguments there, so I would just sort of clarify that by saying I don't agree with it all, but then I don't think any member of it would agree with it all. And when we're talking about Neoreaction, we're talking about lots of different things. So you could say that sort of politics resonates with me just because out of personal experience and anecdotal experience, I've just found that form of organisation and societal organisation and even, small group organisation to be more beneficial in terms of getting things done. As for the compatibility between that and ZAC, the point for me with that was that zero reaction is about understanding limits. It's about understanding the sort of the bleakest reality of things. And that's really what Neoreaction is doing on a political level. However, when I think about that now, the problem of the compatibility would be that I don't know how heavily political zero acceleration is really. It's turned more into sort of a physics-based argument with regards to what's just going on a level of production. But I would still quite like to write that merger, so it's still in the back of my mind as something I'd love to write. Have I ever thought about interviewing Campbell? A couple of people have asked this. No, but not out of, I have whatever's going on with him at the moment, I don't really know. I just leave it be. I don't want anything to do with that. But I do have sort of some rules, sort of almost unwritten rules with regards to who I interview. So they sort of do have to have had published a book, or at least be known for some sort of, for creating or producing some, shall we say, artistic objects, book, film, famous blog, or something along these lines. And they do have to use a real name. That's just something that I just keep as a level of quality. And there's a certain level of irony that I don't want on the podcast too. So yeah, there's that. But I have no real, whatever there. Have I read or got into the work of Francois Laurel? Future Christ delves heavily into Christian Gnosticism. So I'd say it's at least of interest. I've got the Urbanomic Laurel, I'm not sure how to pronounce his surname, sitting on my shelf, and I just never got around to reading it. It's something I want to dig into, but it's probably going to be a long time until I do. So not yet, I haven't read any actually. Do I practice any Christian mysticism? The Jesus prayer or the Carmelite meditation, for example? Yeah, I do practice the Jesus prayer, actually. So yeah, yep. Plans for more teachable courses, e.g. the Kant one. This is a good question. So what was happening with this is, I'm still working on the land book. And it's just taking longer than I thought. And once that first draft's done, what's going to happen? Probably in the new year now. I think that's just the safest thing to say. In the new year, I'm going to start the Continental Current course, which is, following the entire history of continental philosophy, taking on in a chronological form of birth dates, and then looking at the major works of that philosopher. So for Kant, that is the Critique of Pure Reason, the groundwork for any future metaphysics, the other two critiques, anthropology, the metaphysics of morals, and his last opus, I can't remember the title, unfortunately, but so not every single book, but most of them. And then once they are done, then I will turn that into a course with the potential for, seminars, etc. So they'll be coming, but if you're sort of waiting on a camp course, teachable course, then I'd say probably around middle of next year. But once that series is underway, that's going to be one of my big focuses because I'm super excited about it. So yeah. Have I ever read or ventured into any analytic philosophy? Any interest in Wittgenstein, Russell, Nozick, Rorty? Negarostani has argued we should try to amalgamate the two disciplines. So the first question there. Yes, I've ventured into analytic philosophy on a very, very sort of just quick level, just to sort of try and basically understand what's going on there. So I've read Wittgenstein, I've read the Tractatus, and I've read Wittgenstein's biography because that was actually really, really interesting. The one by Ray Monk. The only Russell I've read is his History of Western Philosophy, which I didn't like very much. And Nozick and Rorty I haven't read. I have an interest in it, but the next question sort of answers something there, which is amalgamate the two disciplines. I don't entirely agree with the split. I understand it because there is the split between the continental and the analytic. I understand it. It's clear in terms of style, in terms of approach, in terms of method. It's very clear. So I understand the split, but in terms of answering truths and answering questions, a method would arrive at the same conclusion, just in different form. And I think most philosophers that I've spoken to, most tutors that I've spoken to, would agree in a certain sense that really there isn't as many differences as we like to think there are. And I think really that split just comes from a sort of 10 to 20 year period when the split was so clear in terms of style and method that you had to sort of make the split, whereas I don't think that's the case anymore at all. Have I read Snow Crash, Diamond Age, Others by Stevenson? If so, what do you think about them? I've read those two. I've read Snow Crash and Diamond Age. I've also read The Big U. And I didn't like The Big U, but that's his debut book, so he can be forgiven. I thought it was a bit clunky. But Snow Crash and Diamond Age are just fantastic. Stevenson is so utterly readable. And he's like this... he's like an office ballad. He's very on point, and he's an optimistic ballad in a way. And a lot of what he writes about, it's coming true to the letter. I can't give anything massively original to say about them. I mean, they've been spoken about to death. They're utilised a lot in NRX circles, actually, to go back to one of the other questions. And largely because I think there is this sort of dark optimism with respect to, what the future's going to look like. And one of the things I think I do enjoy about Stevenson is his focus and expansion on what can happen when just one single new technology does get sort of accelerated. So, for instance, in Diamond Age with nanotechnology, he doesn't just use that as this like it's something in the background. It is accelerated to the point where we are understanding how a technology is going to completely change everything for us. But I highly recommend them, and I want to read so many more. I want to read Sevenses, I want to read Cryptonomicon. I've heard they're great. So yeah. Which answer to the Hermitix question surprised you the most? None of them have been massively surprising. Like I could say Nick Land's, with the 5 lemurs, but in retrospect, that isn't surprising at all. None of them have been massively surprising, really. So the next question. I spoke last Q&A of my consideration of becoming an Orthodox Christian, and I speak highly of Father Seraphim Rose. He speaks very critically in Orthodoxy and Religion of the Future of trends in the West towards New Age spirituality and the occult in all its forms due to their leading an individual away from the patristic teachings of the Church that can provide salvation.
I grew up Catholic and am not currently a member of any Christian denomination, but I find Rose's words very compelling. How, in your mind, could one balance a sincere Orthodox practice with an interest in the occult and thinkers like Land and Klages, who are particularly scathing in their critiques of Christianity and organised religion? It appears to me that Rose would label their thought as being demonic in the sense of leading away from Christ, away from repentance and piousness. Big question, and it's a good question, and it's something that I've thought about for a long time. In short, it's how can you balance an interest in the occult with a personal religious following, which really does not want you to go that way. I could take the easy out and go to a Anglican church, which some of them are very, very open about you exploring this stuff. Tolkien is a key example of this. But I wouldn't, Orthodox is what interests me. I can't really answer this question unless I spoke to a priest about it. In terms of what I think now, however, is that as long as they're kept at arm's length, and as long as I continuously read the scripture, in what sense, it's sort of like there's a certain amount of we live in a society there, in that, well, there's certain things that you have to deal with on a daily basis, and I think it's good to understand them. So the way that demonic forces work, for instance, and the way that, let's say Satan props his head up in modern society is something that you should potentially try to understand, because it's something that you've got to, the best way to defeat your enemy is to understand how he's going to try attack you. So there's that, and I think there's a difference between that and practice, and let's say divulging in the thought to the extent of like an indulgence. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. What are my thoughts on HansHermann Hoppe? Democracy, the God that failed, is just fantastic, and it is such a watertight argument with respect to how and why democracy tends to just degrade any society or civilization that it touches. And the passages on time preference are the ones that stuck with me particularly. I really want to dig into his other work, and I really want to dig into Austrian economics a lot more once I've got the time. But I really dig Hoppe. I think he's great. And I think he's great. Like, if you listen to his interviews, he's really funny, and I recommend anyone to listen to him. And he's really not scared of offending people, which is, we need more of that. How did I choose my handle, as in Meta-Nomad? So Nomad was from the Deleuzian Nomad. So the idea was that I had this blog, which I didn't ever really want. A lot of people have political blogs, or they have film blogs, or they have food blogs or whatever, and I didn't really ever want my blog to be like, I'm only writing about this, because you find a lot of dead blogs who reach the terminal point of writing about a certain thing. So the Nomad was like, well, maybe one week I'll write about film, maybe I'll do politics next week's blah, blah, blah. Maybe I'll just put an image up the week after that. And that's how it started. So how it started was writing about these sort of reactionary politics and the accelerationist stuff, and now it's gone to collapse and occultism and all over the place. But I think probably is a thread there that holds it all together. The better was just because I wanted to open that up and say, well, what would be a meta-nomad? What's, you're not only you're being nomadic jumping between these things, but you're actually assessing that process as well on a meta level. So that is where that came from. There is a little, the first post on metanomad.net is about that, actually. So check that out. So that is all the questions. I could add a few things here about what's going on with the podcast. I mean, it's just going sort of swimmingly, recording loads of stuff, trying to find something for a Christmas and perhaps potentially a New Year's special for you guys. Trying to finish the book. Potentially going to begin research into a new course on reactionary to neo-reactionary thought, which goes from, so it would be Bodin, Burke, de Maistre, Junger, and then Yarvin and Land, maybe like Hoppe as well. So I think that would interest a lot of people. And then I also beginning research in the continental current thing, which, as I said, is going to be like the longest series ever. I'm not sure when it would end, so sort of compiling stuff for that. But yeah, any feedback, any recommendations, make sure to sort of either message me, email me, hermitixpodcast@protonmail.com, or message me in the Discord. But yeah, thanks for all your support. It's just going super swimmingly. So yeah, thank you, and I'll see you for the next Q&A in roughly a month.